Kingdom people.
Okay, it's going live now.
All right. Should I just start?
Even. I'm gonna just close my camera.
All right. Okay. So welcome everybody to the program for BayCHI for March 9th, 2021 already. And today we're gonna just have a nice discussion about machine learning and also ethics in AI. All of us are doing AI much more than we ever would have imagined. It's something I always wanted to do and have been working towards all my life. So it'll be a really good thing to start thinking as a community about user interface and AI. This is BayCHI. We are an organization that is part of the ACM, Association for Computing Machinery, with over 75,000 members. And SIG-CHI, that's the part of it that is about human-computer interaction. It has 6,000 members, excuse me. We're much smaller here in the Bay Area. We've traditionally been the biggest local CHI community. Not sure that's always true. I'm Ted Selker. I'm the chair of the organization at the moment. And to become a member, just go to baychi.org, which you probably did in order to come to this meeting. And we'd love it if you joined with a $20 annual fee. And it supports these meetings and gives you access to the user interface community, monthly meetings, a newsletter, a job bank.
Sorry to interrupt you. You're not sharing your slides.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, I am now sharing it. Thank you very much. So BayCHI was founded in 1989, and we are representing the computer-human interface community in the Bay Area. And we are part of the ACM. And if you join for $20 a month, a year, you get access to all these things I was talking about: the community, the monthly meetings, the newsletter, the job bank, consultancy, and birds of a feather meetings. Quite frankly,
then it's not the right screen. I think we're missing your presentation mode.
I'm still not sharing. Oh, I'm so embarrassed. Let me try again. Okay.
You're sharing, but you're not sharing the window you want.
Well, let's stop that and let's do it the right way. I thought I was being so organized, but obviously we will do it one more time. I want to share. Is this okay? Do you see BayCHI on the right-hand side?
Perfect.
We do?
Yeah, that's what we
amazing. So anyway, I'm Ted Selker still. And you probably got here by going to baychi.org. And if you didn't, please go visit there. And we are upgrading our online experience. And we will, and more, it will be up to date with lots of these features. But one thing I wanted to bring up is that on April 10th, we're going to have a little party on Zoom. Just 4:30 to 6:30, just get together, network. And you can look for that on the baychi.org site to find how to join that. And I hope you do. It's a way of getting to know other people in the human-computer interaction community. As a group, we also have to run the organization. And quite frankly, a lot of the best community you can have is being on the steering committee, which is just the group of people that think about what we should be doing, or joining to do a specific helpful thing, like being the social media and publicity chair, or being the dinner coordinator, or being on the website committee, or being a meeting reporter, a video producer. And these are things I want to encourage you all to think of doing. And just for fun, I'd like to know how many people here, maybe just raise your hand. You see that on your interface probably, and say if you're here for the first time. Just be interested to see that. And we seem to have 42 people here, so that's pretty exciting. And we appreciate all of you coming this evening, taking time. And I want to turn it over now to Nancy, who's going to tell us about a passing.
Hi, I'm Nancy Frischberg, and I'm also co-chair for programs at BayCHI, and I've been a volunteer for many years. One of the things in my professional life that has given me great encouragement is I had a writing partner, Gregorio Convertino, and he died about 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, and it's somebody I think we all want to recognize. Let me, if I can share my screen. I'm going to stop screen sharing from you, Ted. No, let's see. There we go. And so here's his share, it says. Yeah, let's share. Okay. So here's his LinkedIn page, which of course is still active, and you can learn a little bit about him. He was most recently a manager of UX research at Google. But the way he and I got acquainted was we both volunteered on the CHI program committee for one of the functions that, one of the venues. I think we were on courses one year, many years ago. And he was active at Park, and for a while he was the BayCHI sponsor of our activities at Park. Many of you remember that we used to meet there monthly in the physical space before we had this virtual coming alive. And so Gregorio was our host there. And I got to know him from that and from his work at Park. But through those experiences, we realized we had many things in common, and we started working on a series of articles, and we hoped it was going to turn into a book about collaboration between UX research and UX and design across organizations. And of course, he was very focused on enterprise, having been at Google and previous to that Cloudera and Informatica, and then Park. And then, and I was also interested in how nonprofits or civic organizations might also participate in these collaborations and demonstrate the usefulness of UX as a catalyst. Let me share with you one other photo of Gregorio. While we have been working together over the past year or so, it's been, or several years, of course, last year we couldn't even meet in one another's homes. And while he was undergoing treatment, we would still try every week to have our meetings. And I took a couple of screenshots of that. The earnestness, despite, and I think this, it was a good distraction for him too. I have to say that attending his memorial, of course, online, gave me new insights into this man who I thought I knew very well. I knew he was gentle and sweet and active and vital in so many ways. And I learned that in his Italian upbringing, he came from the region of Bari. At school, he was called a nerd in Italian. I could find the word for you, but I won't try to open another document right now. And he was always inquisitive, and his friend from high school gave a wonderful portrait of him that's held true to the very end. So I wanted all of us to be aware of his passing, and I wanted all of you who didn't get to meet him to look into him and appreciate that he was a great colleague to all of us. And so now I'm going to pass it back to Ted.
Yeah.
I think, is that right?
Yes.
And I'll stop sharing.
Yes. So thank you very much, Nancy. Really the thing, I guess I will start screen sharing again. This time I will probably get it right if I'm lucky. And we will get our captions because we're gonna, because we have that. And I guess, so we often do celebrate people, like we had a nice program about Larry Tesler when he died. And we also had a nice program about Fred Lakin's death. These are interesting people to our community. But today we're going to move on to a program. And I think Smitha, are you going to introduce the program?
Yes. You can hear me okay, right? Okay. And I think the captions are getting captured too. We'll see. So, hi everyone, I'm Smitha, one of the co-chairs along with Nancy and Ted for the program committee. And as you all know, today's topic is on the intersection of UX and AI. And we say occasional series because we're looking to come back to you on other dimensions of this topic, possibly in March. And the reason why we felt like it was finally time to start having this conversation, at least with the UX community, is we're more and more surrounded by mainstream products and service experiences that feel like they're more personalized, getting smarter, seemingly adaptive, right, through the technologies of AI, ML, automation. So, Michelle, who's been doing this for a while now, will demystify some of the concepts in this topic for us. And also, recently we came across this one New York Times article on the topic of ethics in this area as well, and who should stop unethical AI. And that's where Katie will share more of her perspective and her involvement in this area. So I'll let Michelle introduce herself as well and kick off this topic for us.
I will stop sharing so you can start sharing, okay?
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. And thank you, Nancy, for that remembrance. That was really nice. I will, sorry, this is the fun tech thing. Okay, this is connected, this is connected, this is connected. Can I get some thumbs if you could see my screen? Yeah. I think that you can see it.
Yes.
Okay, great. Sorry.
And then turn on your captions if possible.
Okay, I have not done that before.
At the bottom, is there a closed captioning?
Unfortunately, there is not.
Okay, so we'll just go without it for this part of the talk.
Apologies, everyone. And might be under, you know what, for the sake of everyone and not having me tech troubleshoot, TLDR, I do have all of this typed up on Twitter. And so I think that links to the Twitter where I've been like, oh my God, you guys should check out this awesome BayCHI talk. And then underneath that actually has a whole Twitter thread of all of the resources that I'm going to be talking through today. And I know that there's a recording in there where it does have closed captions. So apologies for that. But hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here and chat with you this evening. I am going to be talking a little bit about my process as a UX researcher and how I build ML products for people. I also want to say too, like, I feel like I am among giants here where like I don't think anything that I'm going to be sharing today is like new or innovative, but I will say that I am really inspired by the work of prior UX researchers. And I think that we need to bring the same energy and curiosity into the field of AI. So this is a talk that I typically give for either data science teams who have never worked with a UX researcher or UXers who aren't quite comfortable and confident in their ability to design for AI and machine learning. So that's kind of what I'm going to be going through today. So a little bit about me. That's my face. Jeez, that's what I look like. Hi, I'm Michelle. I'm a senior UX researcher in machine learning and AI. I work at Google. I'm also the founder and organizer of the Machine Learning and User Experience Meetup. And I also teach, if we have any other educators in the room, I teach at the Stanford D School on designing machine learning. So that's in a nutshell kind of who I am. And a little bit about my journey too. So I actually studied for my undergraduate degree computational neuroscience. A little bit different, although I found that in Kai as well as other UXRs, there's quite a few computational neuroscientists. So hi, nice to see you. It was there. I was doing a lot of work on cochlear implant algorithms and signal noise processing. So building out machine learning models in order to determine like, is this perceptually different? The model says it's N% better, but you put it in front of people and they're like, I don't hear a difference. And so that's kind of what got me really interested in UX research. I got really lucky. I was able to work for Visa's innovation group, doing some innovation research on like Super Bowl, Olympics, call centers. But it really wasn't tied back to what I had studied around, data science. And that's really what I wanted to continue in, is like, well, how do we use data science methods for UX research? So I actually went back to get my master's at the UC Berkeley School of Information, where that's exactly what I studied. And that's where I made the ML UX meetup. And then I ended up at Amazon Music, focusing in working with the ML team specifically to help them think about like, cool, we have a great new ML model, but who is it for? And like, how do we actually integrate it into the product in ways that make sense? And now most recently I joined Google. So that is kind of my trajectory. If there is anyone else who's kind of junior their career and is interested, always feel free to reach out. I do external office hours, so come say hi and talk to me about that. And like I mentioned too, I also teach. Something that I love so much. I do outside of work as well. So if there's anyone else in the room who wants like to trade resources or anything, also totally come by and say hi. If you have seen my talk before, this is just the same one again. And I think this is the one that has closed captions, and I've linked out to somewhere, and it's also written up. But I gave it for DScout, so I'm going to be talking about DScout because I use it a lot, as well as like this giant Twitter thread too. So, okay, that's all the disclaimers and logistics. Let's get into content. So I'm going to be talking a little bit about like what is machine learning and user experience. Then I'm going to share one of my favorite resources, which is the People+AI guidebook. And then I'm going to be sharing a case study about how I've kind of like did a meta-analysis about how I typically do a UX research for ML. So I'm going to share a case study with you all. So getting into it, let's talk about what is machine learning and user experience. How I typically like to think about this is like so many times people are like, those two definitely do not go together. Those are two separate job categories. And I'm like, yes, yes, yes. But however, I think they should, because I'm really interested in like, how do we use data science and machine learning methods in order to inform and drive UX design decisions? But also, how do we design better experiences around the data and around like, what is this algorithm? What can it do? How do I control it? How do I give it feedback? And be really transparent about like the experience around what this algorithm is doing. I will say these are just two kind of giant words on a screen, but I know I'm preaching to the choir here. UX is so much more than design pixels on a page. I say I'm a UXer, but you can see this is all in black and white. So UX research, information architecture, all that stuff too. And the data side as well, like there's a lot to unpack there, from machine learning to artificial intelligence, data science, all that stuff too. And I think it's really important, like I'm just kind of lumping them all in together as data, but that's also how our users experience it. They don't really know what's just like an if statement versus an actual like artificial intelligent neural network or something, right? So it's all ambiguous to them. And so it's important for us to design those good experiences. So when these two come together, they make awesome experiences like this. This is one of my favorites. It's Pinterest's visual discovery tool. And so you could see here, like someone is scrolling and then like they find a picture of a pizza and they want to learn more or like see more like this. And they click the lower right-hand corner and it repopulates the visual screen with more images of pizza that look very similar. And like, we don't need to know the nitty-gritty behind how this happens. This could be something like, oh, for every one image, it pulls up like computer vision similarities of like two other images to like pre-populate, or it could just be something like, oh, it's like hashtags, hashtag pizza or something like that too, more NLP instead of computer vision. But the main important part is like, it makes a seamless experience. Like once I see something that I like, I don't need to go back up to the top and like try to articulate it or type it into the search box of like, search for pizzas or something, right? So like, these are the types of things that I'm really inspired by for like cool, streamlined machine learning UX experiences. Other ones too include, I really like this Google keyboard example where, someone types out, I got into law school, and someone else says, woo, congrats, time to party. And then the keyboard recommends a GIF for partying, right? So maybe that's something with entity recognition. Maybe that's something just like logic, where it just like sees like a bunch of exclamations or party as a keyword. It doesn't really matter. It feels intelligent, feels like it's machine learning powered. And the last example that I'll kind of talk about here too is it's actually from the head of data science at Getty Images. She gave a talk for our machine learning UX meetup last year, but she's really interested in, what does it mean? Getty Images supplies a lot of the images that are used across industries. And so what does it mean to have diversity in their image sets from the data science perspective? And especially for nurses, where it's like, I think over 75% female in the US. Do we design for diversity in like an ideal world where, it's like, 50-50 to, balance out the population? Or should we design for the current world? Like whose diversity and in what way? So thinking about it also from the data side. So this and so much more, I have typed this up into like a couple of my other favorite examples about like what is machine learning in UX. Feel free to peruse that. I've tried to find really great examples. I hope that you can add this now to your repository of like cool examples whenever you go out and give talks and be like, check this out from the ML UX. So that's about like what is machine learning user experience. I also mentioned I run a meetup on it. So I sometimes joke, I feel a little bit like, oh, it's my garage band playing down at the local bar, but like actually we're like kind of a big deal. We have quite a few members across the world. I think now we're closer to 3,000, and we're on all major platforms coming to you. But I would say, like, if you are at all interested, I have tried to make a point to, one, all of our talks are free, so that way anyone can attend regardless of where they are in their career or between jobs or anything like that too. And then two, we record all of them. So we put them up online so that way folks who might not be able to be in the Bay Area physically with us are able to watch them. So that has been quite fun to do. So check out there's like the talk from Andrea, head of data science at Getty Images, and so much more. But really our vision as a meetup is to create a space for data scientists, UX designers, PMs, software engineers, and everyone in between to come together and talk about these machine learning best practices, ideas, concepts, share like, hey, I'm approaching it this way. What are some other ways to approach it? And really just have a conversation, because it's not going to be like a single company that like solves AI and design, right? We're going to be coming up with different types of patterns and everything too. And I think it's really important as a community that we discuss them and share what worked and what didn't work, and we move forward together. So we do this by hosting regular tech talks, networking and happy hours, and then of course sharing our learnings on all of the social media stuff. It's one thing for me to say what we do, but this is kind of a little bit of what it looks like during non-COVID times. We've been doing virtual events and stuff too, but you could see we have everything from startups, like how do startups do like human-centered data science when they might not even have data, like to large scale, like more methods-based things with the data-driven personas using k-nearest neighbors or principal components analysis, unsupervised learning methods on UI click metric data in order to create personas truly driven by the data itself, and so much more. So you are totally invited to come on down. If you are interested, we have an event happening, 2 events in April, but, and yes, like I mentioned, it's all free because of fantastic sponsors and speakers who donate their time. So we've been going now for, this will be our 4th year. And I just want to say, like, when I started it, everyone was like, machine learning, UX, those don't go together, 2 separate flavors. But we're actually seeing a rise of jobs that are specifically data scientists at IDEO, a design company, which is doing a lot of machine learning prototyping, as well as like job descriptions that explicitly call out, like, we are looking for a UX UI designer to bridge the gap between design and machine learning. Like, this is awesome. And I think, I mean, part of me thinks like this is going to go the way of like mobile design, where like everyone was like, I'm a mobile designer. And then like no one says that now. But the other part of me is like, I am really excited to see the rise of like AI designers, and like how do we make sure that our practice and discipline of UX, we have people who are confident in doing design for AI. There's also been a huge rise of resources, which I am thrilled by. Microsoft has those human AI interactions. This was actually a Kai paper. There's the pair guidebook, and there's like so many other ones. I've also written up like, this actually came from my course list for the class that I teach at Stanford, and then I just published it on Medium. So if you want to read a couple more, it's kind of roughly grouped by company and by method. Definitely check out bit.ly MLUX resources. But I wanted to talk to you today about one of my favorite resources, the pair guidebook. So like I mentioned, I work at Google. I will say this was made before I even joined Google. This was a big reason why I did join Google. I was working on something kind of similar at Amazon, and I was like, as soon as this came out, I was like, oh my gosh, this is like the coolest thing. I've later learned the backstory. So basically it was like data scientists, UX designers, PMs, software engineers, all coming together and like for, I guess, one very long weekend, brain dumping all of like the things that they know about designing for AI into like what later became this guidebook and these chapters. And so now they've published it externally, and it's been out for, I think, about 2 years. I just think it's like so great, especially for wherever you are in your journey. You'll see here that there's individual chapters as well as worksheets too, which I found to be really helpful for like team alignments and everything as well. But the 6 major chapters that they've outlined, I think like capture wherever you kind of are in your process. You can kind of like pick and choose. It's not like a typical guidebook where you have to read from start to end. I'm going to focus on 3 of them today. And I will just say, like I mentioned, like, don't feel intimidated, like, oh my gosh, like 6 chapters that I have to read on like these long web pages. No, like take whatever you want from it of like, oh, you know, I'm actually more in like the, you know, feedback and controls. Like I'm looking for ways to give the system feedback and like read that. And they have some great examples in there and everything too. And so a couple of design patterns as well. So one of my favorite chapters is on mental models. And this is truly like understanding your user's point of view. It's so important to remember that your AI is not going to exist in a vacuum. And I think so much of the time we design for like those happy paths, or we're like, yeah, this is going to be like our storyboard and stuff like that. But remember that your AI is going to exist in like a cacophony of other things, whether that's like an Alexa that like not only like lives on your kitchen counter as you're like running around doing a bunch of other things, it's setting timers, it's playing music and all this other stuff, but like all of these other agents, even personalization, recommendation algorithms too. I think some of the most important topics covered in this chapter are around like, what are the pros and cons of introducing your AI as human-like? Like what, I think probably all of us have had an experience where we're talking to a chatbot, but it's like presented as a human of like, hi, I'm Joe, your customer service person or whatever. You're like, hi, Joe, how are you? I hope you're having a great day. Like, I would like to return my package. And then it's like, you can say return or find new label or like something like that. You're like, oh, I thought you were a real person. And like, now this solution is totally destroyed. So like, what if instead we just said like, hi, I'm Joe, the chatbot. I can try to help you do things like return your labels or whatever other things. Also, maybe you don't talk to customer service agents. I feel like I did a lot of work for Visa's call center, so now I'm like extra nice to customer service agents. I digress. So think about that when you design your AI systems. Another one is feedback and control and learning from your users. This is really important because AI is probabilistic, so there will always be times when it fails. And so we need to think of ways to give that system feedback over time, both implicit as well as explicit feedback. And how are you going to deal with those types of feedback, right? Implicit could be something like, oh, I'm just going to skip this song and skip this song. That probably doesn't mean that I never want to hear this artist again. It probably just means that I'm not in the mood to listen to Jolene by Dolly Parton. Like, that's an emotional song. That is a lot. Versus explicit might be like, never play, you know, I don't know, Britney Spears again, or, you know, things like that, which like, how do we weight those types of feedback and how do we make sure that we respect that going forward? And what if you like user share accounts and all these other types of things too? And then the last chapter that I kind of just wanted to call out is errors and failing gracefully. So yes, machine learning will fail. And so it's so important that you design for that. And how do you make sure that like users can actually move forward after an AI failure? How do we make sure that we are giving clear error messaging or different levels of confidence for our users to kind of understand what the system was trying to do? So anyways, that is all to say, there are 6 chapters. That was just like a very high level summary of some of my favorite parts. Even before I joined the team at Google, those were some questions I was like, this is a really great question to be asking. But now I'm going to talk a little bit about a case study. And I believe typically I would pause here for questions, but I'm just going to go through the case study and I think we'll do questions at the end, right? Yes. Okay. So yeah, okay. Join me. We're not going to pretend that we work at a startup. We're going to pretend that we work at a personalized travel startup. And so we are sitting, oh yeah, please put your Q&A in the, please put your questions in the Q&A for after the case study. Thank you, Nancy. So as I mentioned, I've kind of like reflected on my practice from Amazon and a little bit of what I do here at Google, and have kind of distilled like, hey, for the different parts of the machine learning process, how can we do UX research on that? So this is a case study. We are brand new. We are a startup in stealth mode or something probably. And so we're really thinking about, you know, how do we make sure that we build the best personalized travel app? So I typically think about my UX research process for machine learning products in 3 main parts. First is if I'm there early enough, if I'm lucky to be there early enough, I'll do generative research, which is really like, what are possible worlds? How do we think about this space? Then if, you know, maybe we already have like an idea of what the model is going to be, I try to do more evaluative research on the concept or where the product is then going to go. And then once we actually have a working model in a prototype, doing evaluative research on the prototype itself. For the generative research, some things that I like to kind of think of when I'm working with like brand new technology is like, super important for any new domains, but it's like, well, maybe there's like a human analog that we're trying to mirror, but we need to make sure that it's very clear that this is AI. So if we were doing travel recommendations, we might bring in 2 people and have them recommend places to travel to each other and just observe like what stands out about that process. That's very different than if you were just on your phone, like booking travel that way. Maybe it's things like, they're asking each other questions like, oh, who else are you going to travel with? Are there any kids? Is this like a full family thing? Are your parents coming? Or is it going to be something that's like, oh, you know, I don't typically travel with anyone else. I need to make sure that like wherever I travel is within 1 hour of where I live, or like constraints that we currently don't even design for, but with a human-to-human interaction, we kind of learn more about. And another comment that I wanted to make too, because this is BayCHI, some of my colleagues at Google actually published in CHI 2019 a method called Triptych, but it's basically a storyboarding tool for that generative research. And it shows like, hey, here's a potential problem, rate how frequent this problem is, rate how frustrating it is. Here's a potential solution given by AI and a resolution. And you actually have the participants in a focus group style setting evaluate that storyboard and tell you, it helps you kind of prioritize, hey, what are most frequent types of problems? And is this really an AI solution that addresses it? Or are they helping you generate other ideas about how AI can address it? So yes, and I can link to, this is the video for it too from Kai, right there. So that's kind of like, if I have enough time, if I have the luxury of being brought on early, this is kind of where I like to start. But most of the time, I end up jumping straight into some type of mixed methods evaluative. And, you know, if we had done the generative research, we might also use the feedback from that generative research to really inform what these concepts are going to be. And I typically like to do moderated and in-person for this, just because you can dive in deep and ask why. Like, okay, cool, you're doing something, but like, what are you trying to get at? Was this what you expected? I typically, too, if I'm doing something like a chatbot, I might do something like a Wizard of Oz prototype, where you actually have a colleague in another room and is like typing out some of the answers. And you can let folks know like, hey, like we're either going to be simulating a chatbot, or like, you know, my colleague is actually working with a different server or something like that too. So if there is lag time and everything like that. And the really important thing that I cannot stress enough is like, you do not need machine learning for this step. Your machine learning team can be working on their ML model in parallel to you actually testing out the concept of it. I think this is so important because so much of the time folks are like, oh my gosh, like my model isn't built yet, so I can't really test it. But really, you as a UX researcher should be testing what are the inputs and what are the outputs? Do they make sense? Like, is this something that once the experience will be built, the North Star of the experience, does this even make sense to the user? Is this something that they would want? So take that, think about that while you evaluate the concepts. And how I actually like to do this a lot of the times is building a custom prototype for each of the participants. This might sound scarier than it actually is, but really just like, in that survey screener for the participants, asking questions that will inform the prototype within that screener. So you might be like, can you come in on Wednesdays? How many devices do you have? what's your top 3 favorite places to travel? Where do you never want to travel to? And you can also just let them know, like, hey, your feedback from this will be really important for, you know, what we're going to have you come in and test, and be transparent that way. It's also really important to remember machine learning, it will fail. So we do want some edge cases where it doesn't work out perfectly, because we want to see how people react to them. So let's just say we did that. We sent out the screener. We got this. Great. And we've now gathered some information, like maybe this participant really likes major cities, New York, LA, Paris, but they're not really into Roswell and New Mexico. I might not even actually build out the prototype below this part. I might just only do these top like 4 major buttons and ask them for their feedback on that. Like, this is what I mean by a personalized prototype of like, it's fairly simple. It's enough to get the concept across and like test, does this really make sense for our users? And also too, so much of the time I get questions like, well, what if they want to click on Paris? I might be like, great, we don't have that wired up yet. Instead, click on LA and like do a single flow build out from one example instead of having to build them all out. Some of the questions that I ask when we are actually evaluating this concept for the machine learning model is like, is this what you expected? How does the model know this? Like, how did the model get this information? So much of the time, this gives you insight into their mental models about like, oh, you know, I would have expected to sign in with my whatever account, my Facebook account, and that has my travel photos, and my photos have geolocation, and that will tell me. And it's like, whoa, that is fascinating. We have none of that data, but would that actually be helpful? Is that more scary? Or like, understanding kind of how they think this data got here is going to be really important for your machine learning teams, because then it's giving them insight into like, hey, actually users expect X, Y, or Z to inform what they then see in this app. Other things too are like, what happens when it's wrong? So including this, like maybe the participant was like, I really never want to go to Roswell, and this is kind of silly and very specific, but maybe they say something like, I don't like going to non-major cities or something. Ask them what happens when they do get something that's wrong. Why is this there? What? And then they might tell you something like, oh, it's because I share my account and my younger sister is really into aliens, or like, I don't know, something like that. And it's like, oh, okay, they would expect to actually have like, maybe there's different like profiles or something that we can set up or something like that too. That's really the kind of hat you should be putting on. The other thing about the wrong example is, how do you change it? How do you give the system feedback that way? And then the other question that I like to ask, and sometimes I even build out another prototype about like 6 months later, but it's like, how would this change over time? Let's say you took a trip. What happens to this system? Do you give it feedback? Does it just know? Like, where does that information go? Would it recommend more similar things? Would it recommend different things? Really capturing those inputs and outputs before the model is done being built is crucial. Okay, so we've built out the concept. We're like, cool. We've given the machine learning team, hey, here are some thoughts on inputs, on outputs, on what users' expectations are, and we're actually able to build a working prototype. So this is typically, I like to do this unmoderated. In the previous one, I like sitting with the participants and being like, what's going on? Why do you think this? Tell me more about this. Evaluating the prototype, I actually really like to send this out to as many people as possible to find those edge cases in the system. And it's really nice too, because with tools like DScout, who I made this talk for originally, you can do a kind of mixed contextual inquiry with usability on your current prototype and the model itself. And what I mean there is like, you were able to see how people currently are planning their travel and how this would fit into that overall system or what they're currently trying to do and accomplish. So how I structure my moderated sessions are the control. So how do you currently plan for trips? Maybe show us 3 entries around that, 3 to 5 entries, just so that way I have a better understanding of like, you know, oh, okay, you're booking on kayak the first time, but like, what else do you do? What do you do with that information after, and all this stuff too? And I can truly understand the mental model of this participant. Then the experimental, try using the prototype that we've made to actually plan a trip, and maybe do that a couple of times. Maybe the first time it's like a little bit like, whoa, there's like a couple of kinks because it wasn't, your users weren't expecting it to be so AI driven. But maybe over time or a couple usages, they're like, actually, this is a really cool feature, or I would have expected that. And then the last part, reflection, feedback, thoughts, ideas, ways to improve. And here's kind of some examples of this too. for those of you who have not used eScout, it allows you to do like screen capture. It's kind of like Snapchat meets Qualtrics, where you can do like a screen capture as well as like lots of survey questions, which I really love. It makes my analysis way easier because you can ask them to tag for you exactly what they're doing and all that stuff too. So it's really nice to kind of contextualize how people are using the AI system as well. And then experimental, like, okay, now use this prototype, and they could do selfies and all this stuff too. And then of course the reflection part. So that's kind of like my 3 main stages of that larger evaluating the prototype unmoderated. And yes, I will also say too, like, this is not like a 1-week process of UX research. This is like a 1.5-year program if I have the time. This is much longer. And so similar to the pair guidebook, I encourage you, like, if there were any parts of this that you're like, oh, that actually would be useful, like totally pick and choose what parts of this resonate with you and your work. And yeah, I would just strongly recommend thinking and planning out time for when structuring your UXR research for ML products. So if you are interested in learning more, highly recommend checking out the PAIR website. They have a bunch of really great things. Yes, the guidebook, one of my favorites, big reason why I joined Google. They also have like AI explorables, which are just really fun examples to explore machine learning and AI. They have different tools, different platforms, and they also have a Medium channel, which is posting a lot of case studies, which I personally really enjoy. Of course, there's the ML UX resources. Here, I can post this in the chat as well. And this is, remember, like the reading list from my Stanford course that I had originally made, and then it has now been updated with some other links that you can kind of peruse. It's kind of intimidating. It's very long, but like, if there's parts that resonate with you, awesome. Or if you're looking for something in particular, totally feel free to reach out to me. And as I mentioned, we do meetups for free. So if you're at all interested, totally check these out. Our next one is going to be on April 6th, and it's going to be with Y Labs, which is a company on AI observability and explainability. And so it's Sam Gracie is actually a UX designer. And so he's going to be sharing a little bit about the intersection of ML and UX and data. And the last thing I will just end on is, how are our events free for everyone? It's because we're part of the larger feminist AI community. And so Feminist AI is a nonprofit that is reimagining AI for everyone or everybody. And so if you're at all interested, donate at GoFundMe, but also just like check them out. I do a bunch of free tutorials for them. We folded ML UX into their nonprofit. They are fantastic and trying to get more folks in the room creating AI systems. Yeah, and then I think this is exactly 30 minutes. So on that note, I just want to say thank you all for listening. BayCHI for Smitha and Nancy for finding me and inviting me. And if you do want to say hi, I can write my email and Twitter down in the chat too. But yeah, just thank you so much for the time. It's so nice to meet you.
We had a few questions, Michelle, in the Q&A panel. I don't know if you can see them.
Ooh, let me see. I'm on like a half-baked version of Zoom, so I might need you to read out the questions if that's okay.
Sure. The first one is actually from someone who hasn't disclosed their name, so I'll just read that. You were talking about the storyboard, and they were asking, what does the storyboard look like? Cartoons, scenes with humans in them, or just stuff the user would see on a screen or something else?
That's a great question. I'm going to post the actual Kai paper down here. And you can, I think, also watch the video, which has some things on that too. It totally depends. I don't think it needs to be people or cartoons or whatever. I have done it a lot of the times with literally stick figures that I draw, and I'm not the best artist. But really, it's just enough to get the point across to be like, let's see, what example can I share? Let's take the trouble one. Let's just say like, our first one is our problem, and it's like, oh, I'm having a difficult time finding places to travel. And it might just be like a little description and like someone looking frustrated. And then I just want to ask people like in that focus group, is this even a problem that you have? Is this like, how frequently does this occur? Is this a top priority problem for you? The next one might be like, my AI chatbot is able to ask or like figure out what places to recommend. And like, does it seem like a feasible solution to you? Are you excited about this? Like all this other stuff too. And a resolution as well. But definitely check out that kite paper and the YouTube talk, or I guess it's a preview video.
What?
Oh,
You're on mute.
Smitha.
You're on mute, Smitha.
Okay. Classic Zoom helps you stay on mute if you want to stay on mute. Anyways, I think there was another question around, actually, since Indy's already on the call and we know who's asking the question, would you like to ask yours yourself, Indy? I think you should be able to share.
Sure. Hi, Michelle. Nice to meet you. I didn't catch the very beginning, but I'm assuming when you went through the generative research, I'm a generative researcher.
Oh, cool.
And I wrote a book on mental model diagrams. And I also did this huge 100-person research study for an airline, part of which asked kind of like, how do you plan vacations? It's all generative research. Actually, we were doing some problem-based research in there too. And so I was just laughing because the example you gave of like, oh, let's have two people come in and talk about like what they would do. I'm like, no, she's not saying that out loud right now. Maybe she's doing it tongue in cheek.
Totally. Yes, I am so thrilled that you are here and literally to have an expert who has written the book on generative research. Yes, please feel free to throw out some other ideas. What I actually, it depends on like what I'm actually doing in terms of that generative research.
Example.
Yes. And
Yeah.
so sometimes like when I used to work more on voice assistants, we were really interested in like, how do friends recommend things to other friends? And so like either like, hey, what does that even look like? What is that process for you? But also like, what are like maybe given some types of constraints or something like, oh, you only have 30 seconds or you only can text them something and you can't send a link or other things like that too. Like what are other creative ways that folks can kind of come up with this? And it's mostly also a big part of what I do is trying to get stakeholders understanding the importance of user research. So having our PMs, our lead software engineers sitting and just watching like, oh, you know, they might have a preconceived notion about like, oh yes, everyone is just going to find travel by like doing this one, I don't know, by like looking on our app. And it's like, no, look, this is like for you to understand too, that there are so many different mental models about how this actually works. But totally open to other ideas too. Thank you for sharing. Oh, Smitha, I think you're on mute again.
Thank you. I think we have maybe time for one more question. Pete, would you like to ask what you were saying in chat?
We turned your mic on, Pete, I think.
Look at this. Okay, great.
Yeah.
Good. Hi, nice to meet you.
Hi.
So my question is, how frequently do test participants know or even care what capabilities AI adds to a product? In other words, when you inform them that they're testing a machine learning enhanced product, how often is the reaction, yeah, so what? And what other responses have you gotten when you tell people, oh yeah, this has AI in it and it's going to be super advanced?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it depends. Sometimes I won't even say specifically like this is an AI something. Sometimes I might just be like, hey, we're testing out a new product for travel and it's using a couple different new ways and like there's almost like a baked in assumption I've noticed in the last like I'm going to say like year and a half of testing things where people are just assuming that everything is AI and it's like even if it's like, oh, like I had one participant actually on a login screen be like, oh, it was auto-completed because of AI. And it's like, what? It's auto-completed because it's a screenshot still. But yeah, so I think the more important thing is like asking about how they actually want to use the technology or what they think is happening with their data. I think that also helps them articulate where they think their data is going and how they think it's going to inform the system, whether it's AI or not. Yeah. I hope that answers your question. These are all great questions. I feel like my brain shuts off at 7, so this is a little bit late of a talk for me.
Huh. Yes, I think that's what I was looking for. Thanks.
Awesome. I'm happy to continue this conversation in DRP at another point too. Thank you for chiming in with these great questions.
So in the interest of time, I'm thinking maybe, Michelle, if you could answer some of the remaining questions that some others had in the Q&A panel, and then we can continue on to Katie's portion and revisit towards the end as well.
Perfect. Thank you all so much for listening. It's nice to meet you. And Katie, I'm so excited for your talk. This is secretly why I was all like, sure, I'll speak. Oh my gosh, this is awesome. I hand it over to you.
Michelle, it's lovely to meet you. And this was a great lead in to what I'm going to talk about. So let me share my screen and get this up and going. My toddler is singing herself to sleep in the next room in an incredibly nasal voice. So if you hear her, I don't know if the mic's picking her up. If you hear Let It Go, that's not me. So I'm Katie Shilton. I'm an associate professor at the University of Maryland in College Park, but I am a covert BayCHI interested party because I actually live in San Jose and commute to Maryland during normal times, which is yeah, but anyway, I'm happy to be here, really excited to get to know some of you. And today I'm going to talk a bit about UX as a lever for ethics and ethics discussions in AI design. And specifically, I'm going to focus on a couple of ethical values, practicing privacy and fairness in AI, and ways that UX professionals, I think in particular, can help find opportunities to build those values into AI design. As I suggested, I'm going to be focusing on the practice of human values like privacy and fairness in AI, and specifically a form of AI fueled by machine learning. So like Michelle, I'm going to focus on ML in this talk. And I'm really interested in the public reaction to AI and ML broadly that's being called the techlash. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about 2 human values that are critical to improving how we do AI. First up will be privacy. I'll talk about a bit why privacy is a problem in AI design, and then what we as UX professionals might do about it. And then we'll think a little bit about fairness. Again, why it's a problem, what we might do about it. And throughout, I'm going to be focusing on the critical role of UX professionals and HCI researchers in attending to both privacy and fairness. And at the end, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the work I've done with SIGCHI, the organization, to address these issues in our conferences and in our research. Okay. I probably don't need to introduce you all, you live in the Bay Area, to the techlash, but just in case, we're now seeing regular headlines, podcast episodes, a major motion picture or a Netflix documentary about what are increasingly being viewed as the ethical failings of tech and of big tech in particular. And I'm somebody who's studied the tech industry for years, and I think some of this criticism lacks nuance. Tech is a gigantic and complex industry, but there is no doubt that the industry broadly has struggled with whether and how to talk about its politics, its values, and its social obligations. And I actually credit AI, and specifically the subsection of AI that's fueled by machine learning that uses data about people, with a lot of the attention that tech ethics is suddenly getting. When I first began working in tech ethics in the sort of late aughts, 2007, 2008, it was pretty common for technologists, the people I was working with and studying, to claim that technology was a neutral tool and that it was up to users to do good or bad things with it. And that's a point of view that's been critiqued by science and technology studies for decades, right? But it was still really pervasive within technical fields like software engineering, less so within HCI, but within sort of straight software engineering, pretty common. But now it is really rare to hear somebody claim that ML in particular is neutral or without human values. And it's become increasingly clear that ML in fact reifies existing biases and disparities that are baked into the data it uses and that it learns from. So as Rua Benjamin, author of the wonderful book Race After Technology, writes, existing social biases are reinforced, yes, but new methods of social control are produced as well. Whenever we hear the promises of tech being extolled, our antenna should pop up and question whether that hype of better, faster, fairer might be hiding, what it might be hiding and making us ignore. And when bias and inequality come to light, lack of intention to harm is not a viable alibi. So the how. How do we spot bias and inequality during AI design and ML design? How do we forestall social and political problems during the design process so that we didn't mean to isn't our excuse? With my students at the University of Maryland, I formed the Ethics and Values in Design Lab to try and guide technology design so that human values are as much a part of the process as values like speed and efficiency. We've worked in a variety of ways to incorporate an organizing concept that came out of my early work, which is that of values levers. Values levers are work practices or design practices that surface ethical issues within technical work. So within the day-to-day work, they are the things that bring ethics to the surface and that make particular human values relevant to technical work. So we studied a variety of tech workplaces as part of this work, from ubiquitous computing research to network architecture to mobile application development to computer security research, and to try and identify levers like this that happen in ordinary workplaces. And we've just discovered some pretty consistent themes. Practices like interpreting policy for design, everything, and policy could be everything from App Store guidance, so like little p policy, to GDPR, big policy. But that process of trying to design around policy or with policy or for policy surfaces values and values tensions as developers try to negotiate decisions to satisfy policies. Engaging with users frequently surfaces human values. That will surprise none of you. But some areas of design, of course, do this much more than others. And this is one of the reasons why UX needs to be a huge part of AI design. Practices like translating context documents, the README files that come with a new to you piece of software or data set, can surface values issues. I'm going to talk quite a bit about that in a minute. And particular design methods such as envisioning cards, design fictions, design noir can be effective values levers as well if people are using them and doing them. Those tend to occur natively less often in design, but they certainly are being used and they are great at surfacing values tensions. So today I'm going to talk about a few particular values levers around privacy and fairness. Okay, so first let's talk about privacy. Privacy is one of the first values that tend to surface when people start talking about the big data that fuels machine learning. Companies like Clearview AI, a facial recognition startup, have been accused of having, quote, nightmare privacy policies. That's from a newspaper article. And recent attempts at contract tracing during the coronavirus pandemic have been stymied by privacy concerns. So the public is pretty gun shy about privacy at the moment, and with good reason, historically. But what do we as tech professionals do about that? Machine learning frequently relies on digital data that documents people's interactions, movements, habits, and routines. So I like to map, I think it's a useful sort of tool to think with, to map this data on two spectra, private to public and intentional to automatic. So you can think of private intentional data as secrets, things like text to a spouse or electronic health records. People know they're creating them, but they only share them in restricted contexts, and that sharing of context, the context you share it in, is really, really important. Public intentional data are broadcasts. They're things like tweets. People know they're creating them, and they generally know they're sharing them widely. Private automatic data are intel. They're created without human intervention or sometimes even knowledge by digital spies, if you will, and they're not widely shared generally. Think about the data collected by your DVR, about your viewing habits, or your smart fridge, or your thermostat. Finally, there's public automatic data that can be thought of as exhaust, the stuff that you're not aware or you're not intentionally putting out into the world, but that is captured in public. So CCTV recordings are a good example of this, or remote sensing images of your home. Things like Fitbit data or search history or GPS logging on your phone, they fall in between these extremes, right? It's sort of easy to map the extremes. It's a little harder to map the stuff in the middle. But I do think that this framework suggests something fundamental to data privacy, that it's contextual. People have different expectations for different kinds of data. And so figuring out where your data lies in this framework is a critical first step to understanding potential privacy concerns. Data type isn't the only factor that matters to context, however, right? It's just one piece of context. Contextual expectations also depend on who's asking for the data and how it's going to be used. So once you've figured out where your data set falls and how private it's likely to feel to people, it's time to figure out how people might react to particular uses or reuses of that data. And so with several partners, including business ethicist Kirsten Martin and my University of Maryland colleague, Jessica Vitak, we've worked on survey techniques to gather people's contextual expectations for various forms of data. And specifically, we've been using factorial vignettes, which are a survey type that are designed to investigate human judgments and sort of value judgments in particular. These vignettes present respondents with short hypothetical scenarios, vignettes, that vary by rotating items within a set of factors. And I'll show you an example in a second. Respondents make judgments about each scenario. So they read these short stories, they make judgments, and then you can analyze those that judgments to see which factors are more or less important to respondents. So this is an example of one of the vignettes we presented to participants in a study of Facebook users' expectation for data use and reuse. And each highlighted factor here, so when we gave these to people, these were not highlighted, but this is for your benefit here, is randomly generated from a list of items. And participants would see about 40 of these randomly generated stories. And they would then use a slider to indicate whether they agreed that the use of their data was appropriate and whether they agreed it was concerning. So in our study of Facebook users, we surveyed 352 people and showed them about 40 of these stories each. People found that data collection for health research was more appropriate than other forms of research. And actually, these results were collected before the COVID epidemic, so we suspect that this might be an even stronger result right now. On the other hand, something about the word gender studies seem to trigger more distrust in uses of data. You won't be surprised to hear that of data types, sexual habits, preferences, and behaviors are registered as the most sensitive data that we asked about. And purpose of data, people were less concerned with non-research uses or more instrumental uses of the data. So data that was used to improve products or services was less concerning than research uses of data, which I think is an important thing to think about when you are designing products. Or if you're doing research, right? To think that people might have different opinions about data uses for those two purposes. And finally, participants judge scenarios as less concerning and more appropriate when researchers gain consent than when they disclose data use afterwards. And they judge scenarios as less concerning and more appropriate when researchers disclose data use than when they were never notified. So consent is still clearly the gold standard. It's the only awareness factor that nudged responses into the agree portion of the spectrum for appropriate and disagree for concern. But for studies in which it is very difficult to get consent, disclosure of data after the studies was a second place option. Responses to this fell right below the median, or just slightly concerned and slightly inappropriate. So, not great to notify people afterwards, but better than not notifying them at all. Okay, so moving forward with contextual notions of privacy, I think that UX professionals and researchers in particular have a pretty critical role to play in not only raising privacy concerns because they've talked to users or because they're advocates for design ethics, but also addressing them in design. UX can use their expertise about the context that data is gathered in to generate and with users evaluate plausible use cases for data. And I think things like vignettes can be very helpful in evaluating plausible use cases and ethical use cases for data. And though our Facebook findings are in a totally different sort of are very specific to one platform and context. I'm raising them here to be evocative rather than normative. Like I don't think that our findings apply to different. In fact, we are going to now test. We're just finishing analysis of a number of different platforms to see where the differences lie between platforms. But I think that awareness is likely to remain a constant. Whether people understand how their data is being used and what that means will always matter to privacy. And the literacies and information presentation that good awareness requires is an expertise that UX can bring. Okay, let's shift away from privacy to a second human values issue that's very salient in AI, fairness. A range of public examples in the last 5 years, plus some really important academic work, has highlighted the ways in which AI learns bias and discrimination from the data that fuels it. So parole algorithms, automatic image cropping, learning chatbots, HR tools, ad delivery, and image search have all been impacted by the use of historical data, which has had historical social biases baked in. For example, Amazon's recruiting tool learned to discriminate against people who had women's colleges and women's social organizations on their resumes because it was trained on the resumes the company had already received for software engineering positions, resumes that historically had come predominantly from men. So how do we encourage the kind of reflection on data that spotting and mitigating bias requires? My doctoral student, Karen Boyd, who's now a postdoc at the University of Michigan in their iSchool, has worked on this very question for her dissertation. And so I'm going to share a little bit of her work with you now. In particular, she was really interested in how machine learning engineers grapple with bias in training data sets that they didn't create themselves, so training data that they'd inherited from someone else. Data sharing is pretty common in machine learning, and a group of researchers have proposed that training data sets should come with data sheets, a document that specifies the data set's motivation, composition, the collection process, and its recommended uses. And the authors make an analogy to the spec sheets that accompany electronic device components. This is by Gregorio et al. And so Karen, my student, used this idea of the data sheet to conduct a think aloud comparison study in which she gave a set of ML engineers a problematic data set. It was faces that appear to be overwhelmingly white and male. In addition, the images had been taken without explicit consent of the people they represented. She then gave all of her participants a problem to solve with that data. They were supposed to talk about how they would build a facial recognition system for a national chain of jewelry stores as part of their loss prevention efforts. Half of her participants were also given a data sheet that described the motivation, the composition, the collection process, and the recommended uses of that photo data set. And what Karen found is that data sheets help trigger recognition of ethical issues and signal to the ML engineers that ethics is relevant to the task at hand. So of the participants that had data sheets, the vast majority mentioned ethical issues in the data set unprompted by Karen. The ML engineers without data sets did recognize at least one ethical issue when directly prompted during a follow-up interview, but most of the engineers with data sets who read it identified one or more ethical issues on their own as they were talking aloud, and they tied it into their technical work during the think aloud. So they would talk about how they were going to mitigate it, things like that. And in addition, the data sheets particularly supported engineers in a process we call particularization, figuring out what to do about an ethical issue once you've spotted it. So spotting it is the first step, but then figuring out what to do is the second. And data sheets were really useful for that. For example, this quote comes from a participant as they actively read the context document and recognized that the demographics of the data would likely reflect the demographics of the platform that the data had been taken from. So they said, where did it come from? Photo bucket. Okay, so whatever the demographics are for photo bucket, that's what I can expect in here. And they recognize that the data set might have biases, saying, quote, that could introduce errors in the data set, biases. So using context documents as a concrete values lever for engineers to spot and problem solve. So using context documents is an example of a values lever, and it helps engineers spot and problem solve ethical issues. So I've introduced just a few ideas of values levers for privacy and fairness, and they have something central in common. I talked about methods for interpreting context in privacy design and methods for communicating data context to help identify and unpack fairness concerns. The fact that both of these values levers revolve around making the context of data visible and understandable highlights the critical role that UX can play in AI ethics. UX professionals and researchers are experts in context. A deep understanding of the context of data collection and use enables you to surface ethics, to help make ethical principles visible on design teams, to relate ethics, to interpret ethical principles as design relevant, and to practice values, to think about places to concretize human values in actions, in processes, and in policy. And a final note, I focused on it. Oh, pardon. It is also late here. And I've just lost my voice. A final note I've been focusing on. Let's see if I got it back. Yes, mostly. I've been focusing on an ML-based definition of AI because that's where my empirical research has been, but ethical issues extend throughout AI. And privacy and fairness are not the only values we need to think about. Topics like representation or accessibility might be really important for chatbots, for example, and an example that's come up several times tonight. And so I think a useful role for UX professionals might be brainstorming values levers that you can bring to these topics as well. And I want to close finally with some work that ACM SIGCHI is doing to encourage HCI researchers to reflect on the ethics of their work during the publication process. The SIGCHI Research Ethics Committee has been around since 2016, and it was founded by Dr. Amy Bruckman at Georgia Tech, and it's set up as an advisory committee. It's a group of folks from all over the world, and this is our current membership, who have some research expertise in research ethics, and who can provide advice to authors and reviewers and program chairs about ethics challenges in CHI research. I think it's really important to share our decisions are not binding. We don't decide if work is accepted or rejected. Reviewers do that. Instead, we exist to provide authors and reviewers with background on established standards and community norms, or the lack thereof, which for many of these issues, norms are still emerging and we haven't figured them out, and we can let committees know that, around particular research practices. So we hope that such information can contextualize reviewer concerns, and that our feedback can help authors clarify their research choices. So generally, our process is that ACs reach out to us when there's a concern on a committee about the ethics of work, and then we also take a look at the work, review it, and give feedback to the reviewers and the authors themselves. We've been doing a lot of direct outreach to ACM paper chairs around conference paper deadlines to let them know that we're available and we'd love to help. And the ACs forward papers to the committee. And at least 2 members generally review them. In the last year, so between the fall of 2019 and the fall of 2020, sorry, I haven't updated the slide. I should. We've received a few inquiries this spring as well. But we got about 10 papers. So we're not talking about a huge volume of papers. Most papers never come to us, right? But CHI sent the most, but IUI, ICMX, send some, and then we've gotten a few, and we welcome more. One of the reasons I'm telling you this is we welcome more pre-research inquiries from researchers. And one of the challenges of advising ACs on research ethics is that the work has already been done, right? And sometimes it might have been nice to be able to talk to researchers before they did a particular kind of data collection to help shape it. And so we very much welcome pre-research inquiries from readers and researchers, and we've gotten a few of those. And the kinds of challenges we've been seeing in the last year, we've seen quite a few questions about consent. particularly for social media data, things like that. Deception, particularly doing user studies where you put fake information on social media or deceptive information interfaces. We've seen quite a bit of that. We've seen challenges around risks to sensitive populations, including whether publishing particular quotes or material would put a population at risk. We've seen worries about potential harm to particularly participants being asked to engage with difficult or scary or upsetting materials. Discursive harms, this was quite interesting. How to represent race in AIs is a challenge, a hugely challenging question. And then a few questions about potential misuse of resources. So using hacked data sets, scraping data from websites that might not allow it, things like that. So these are all themes that we've been seeing and that we try to give advice on. So I'm going to end here with a link to my project websites. There's an email address here, the CHI Ethics Chair email address. If you'd like to contact the SIG CHI Ethics Committee, that comes to me as the chair right now, although I won't be chair forever, but for the moment, that comes to me, as well as a link to my lab site. And if you can follow up, I'd love to take questions now, of course, and always happy to answer emails as well. So I will stop sharing and head to the Q&A.
Actually, you may want to leave either your title or your final slide up because we keep the captions going that way.
Oh, that's great. Okay, let me do that.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Cool. I think we have, thank you, Katie, again, for walking through that. And, there are some more questions that came up. Actually, the first one is from John. I think he was sharing a resource. John, would you like to say something along what you've been sharing?
Okay, I hadn't planned to, but sure, I just thought you might enjoy, as an ethicist, I thought you might enjoy an article I wrote called Everything I Really Need to Know About User Experience I Learned in Sunday School.
Oh, fantastic. Oh, I'm so interested. I will, UX Mag, perfect. I will look that up.
That's it.
Thanks for sharing.
Sure.
Speaking of which, I think we're trying to put together a post-meeting list of resources that have been shared. So I think there have been plenty of folks who've been posting some links on our chat too. So yeah, we'll share that out with the group.
Oh, that's wonderful. Michelle had so many great resources in her talk. So that's a really good idea to get a running list going.
Yep, I don't want to lose those.
So those will be, I was just going to say, Smita, those will all be posted on the calendar entry for this program. So your abstracts will remain, and then we can add some notes on the bottom.
Awesome. Thank you. I also wanted to share too, Katie, your talk reminded me, I just saw this great roundup of HCI and AI preprints for CHI this year. And so I just shared that in the chat as well. Very relevant, so.
Oh, fantastic. I haven't seen those yet. That's great.
Cool. Mm-hmm.
And I think Indy, would you like to go ahead and ask your question? I enabled.
Yeah. Now I am unmuted, yes. I was just curious, it sounded like you were talking about papers were a way that you, as the ethics board, sort of review concepts. Is there another way to interface with the ethics board?
We would really love to encourage people to reach out to us before the paper stage, or even if they're doing, applied research. At some level, there will be a question of, how much of this we can do. It's a group of volunteers, but it's a large group of volunteers, and we have capacity to do more than we're doing now. So I'm volunteering them. We'll see what they say, but I think we would very much welcome emails. You could contact me or the CHI Ethics Chair email address and sort of reach out and say, here's what I'm thinking about. Is that something you have expertise on? And we'd be happy to share it if we do. I think norms, so research ethics norms are different between research ethics and applied research to some degree. And I think it's important to just acknowledge that it's largely a group of academics, so we may or may not be super useful for applied research, but there are some applied researchers on that board. You know, academics like to think we know about everything. So, you know, but I think we know. We would love to, yeah. So please reach out and at least ask if it's something that, you know, we can be helpful with, and we would try.
That's fantastic. There are a lot of people who feel the pressure of their stakeholders and don't feel as if they have any defense against some of the things they're being asked to do. And this would be a great way for them to defend.
That's quite interesting. I hadn't thought about the sort of shield that a researchy body, you know, that was a part of a professional organization might provide. It's very attractive to me. I maybe would need to talk to somebody at BayCHI and make sure they're comfortable with us doing that. But
yeah,
I like that idea.
Yeah, and I have just a quick follow-up question on that. You know, it feels like right now the topic of you know, ethics in this field is largely along the lines of being self-regulated, right? It's like, be responsible, you know, do the right thing. But again, how far can that go to do the right thing, right? Unless there's actually regulation. So wonder what the future will be.
Yeah, I tell people that when I started in this field 15 years ago, I was really interested in policy and in technology policy, and I got very discouraged very quickly and decided, no, I would try to change the culture of computer science because that seemed like an easier job than changing policy in the US. That has changed. I think I bet wrong, right, on that. Like, I think I was, that was the lack of foresight, because actually I do think we are going to see technology policy, meaningful technology policy legislation. Now, what it will look like, whether it will be effective, whether it will be any good, I don't know, right? It's going to be, it's such a challenge. This is such a challenge, but there's certainly more interest in it than there ever has been at the federal level and the state level. I mean, California, Maryland have new data privacy laws. The European Union would really like to, is moving on this. So it's quite interesting to sort of to see what that balance is going to be between regulation and sort of self-regulation in the industry. Yeah, I don't think any of us have a crystal ball into where that balance, but I agree with you that it can't all be us trying to figure out what the best norms are and pledging to try and do them within our organizations and pushing back against the wheel of capitalism, right? Like that's not going to be enough. There needs to be some balance.
I think Pete Stahl also had something you were sharing. Pete, would you like to go ahead and share?
Sure. This question is very much along the same lines as Indy's, and actually what you were just talking about with macro level regulation. This is more at the micro level, sociological. It's wonderful that you've got a way to make the data scientists aware of ethical issues using these levers. I think that's marvelous. In practice, in industry at least, the data scientist's job is to come up with the results that a business owner or a product manager has specified. And it may be that the business owner's job depends on them being blind to ethical concerns. So my question is there any contemplation of addressing the next step, which is, you know, exactly what you said a minute ago, pushing back against capitalism?
Yes. So again, you've pointed to something that I did a bunch of research on the wrong thing in some ways, right? So again, you know, when I thought, all right, well, I'm gonna look at how, you know, how it is that technologists come to recognize ethical issues, and then AI solved that problem for me, right? And now people recognize that technology has ethical issues. So now what's the next step? Convincing the project managers, convincing the business owners, convincing, and that is a thankless job. My colleague Jake Metcalf and Manny Moss and Dana Boyd have a really nice paper about what a group of people that they call ethics owners, who are the folks who have been hired in Silicon Valley to represent, to be the ethics owners, so represent ethics in these companies, and it is a very difficult job, and they've outlined exactly why, and it is because they have to push against logics of capitalism, and because there are no, I mean, what does it look like to succeed in one of those jobs, right? What are the metrics for, good ethics, right? Or I helped the company do a little less last year, or that it's very hard to prove that you're doing a good job. And so I think that's where we need to turn our attention, is what does it look like to help to sort of scaffold the data scientists who are saying, right, yeah, we shouldn't be doing this with this data. Or is it professional norms? Is it particular kinds of training we can give them? And, there are now undergrad programs springing up everywhere to teach data ethics alongside data science, which is fabulous. But are we just preparing students to go into jobs where they will feel like whistleblowers, right? So the literature on being a whistleblower is
exactly.
It's not a good position to be in. So this is a question that keeps me up at night, and I haven't figured out how to do it, but it is my next project, and I think it's going to involve hopefully studying students from some of these new programs as they go into organizations and start to grapple with these things. So it's going to involve my colleagues who are studying the leaders in this space, these ethics owners. It's going to involve people talking, across to each other in forums like this to find strategies that are working for them. There's sort of a lot of pieces that have to be put into place, and I'm so glad you asked, because I think this is critical, and I don't have, and it's going to involve regulation. That's going to have to just be a piece of it, but I don't. It's going to be interesting to see how well that piece of it goes.
Okay, that's wonderful. And don't shortchange an idea that came up also a minute ago, which is professional organizations having standards.
Yes, I think, yes, this is something I'd like to see the ACM take the lead on. And IEEE actually has been doing quite a bit of work on professional standards in AI ethics, and it's something that, I think ACM could do even more of. So I think that's a great idea.
Good, terrific. I love the talk. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Great question.
And as a follow-up, I think folks might be interested in that paper that you mentioned just now.
Yes, I will give that to you to add to the list of resources.
Cool. So, Michelle, did you want to add to anything to that last answer? I saw you nodding in the background.
No, I just am so enjoying Katie answer. I'm bummed because if we were in real times, I get a chance to talk to Katie. So I'm thinking like, oh, how do I contact Katie afterwards? I'm so excited.
My email's right there. Can't wait to talk.
May I ask a question? I just wanted to ask maybe both of you the difference and how you feel about when you ask people questions about how they feel versus you watch their performance. It's a lot of qualitative experiments, and I just think it's a very interesting topic to me anyway.
Yes, it depends.
So,
I mean, I think it's really interesting asking about AI because so much of the time people are like, yeah, cool, AI, yeah, rub AI on this, it'll be awesome. And it's like, once you start getting down into the weeds of like, I think this is why I ask so much questions about like, how does the model know? And like having them kind of like understand that and deduce it for you, even if the model isn't built yet, of like, well, I think it would get that data from my contacts, but I never gave it permission. And like, so then they have to like articulate back out, like kind of their mental path as to like what they're okay with. And like, oh yeah, if it only did like this, yeah, I'd be okay with that. And like, that's kind of like the interesting part for me. But as I mentioned, like in the last, like, I've been doing UX research on ML for like about 5-ish years. I used to work on ML systems. People are just like assuming AI is just behind everything. They're just like, oh yeah, this is like an AI thing. And it's like, whoa, wait, what? And so I don't know. I'm really interested in what that means for our field as like UX practitioners. If like, yeah, if it's going to be like a mobile design. I don't know. Hope that answers your question.
Well, I was thinking about for Katie, when can we, when people say things, I think it's often political. So if I watch them do things, then it's actually shows what they really, what their actual, what they do. And so I just wanted to, if Katie's nodding, I really want to hear what she has to say about.
Yeah, no, you're pointing out something that's super important in qualitative research, which is to understand that people's responses are different if you ask them something, say in a survey or in a vignettes, than they are if you watch them do. So that's why we often pair, say, ethnographic work or contextual inquiry with surveys or other sort of things that are easier to scale up, but are involve asking people. I will say that they both are both methods are important, not just for scalability, but for normative, if we're thinking about sort of normative things like privacy or ethics, because we do want to gather people's aspirations, right? So yes, so the privacy paradox is the classic example of this, where people say they don't want to give up their data to companies, but then they do, right? But it's not because people are, illogical or, well, we can talk about rational actors, et cetera, but it's because we have no other choice. And if we want the service, we have to give up our data, right? And so what we do want to aspire to what people say, which is, I am bothered by the fact that I have to give up my data, and yes, I still do it, right? And so that I do think like often this difference between what people say and what people do is used as sort of a cudgel in the privacy world to say, well, look, but everybody does, everybody gives up their data and they're fine with it. It's, look at what they do. And I just want to point out that like we should try and aspire to what people say sometimes, especially in the normative sense, because people will express something that is important to them. It's like, smoking or all kinds of other things where what they say and what they do is different, but we want to try and live up to the aspiration of what they say. So I wanted to sort of point to that, but from a methodological perspective, you need both. And it's important to know that there's a difference.
I'm on mute again. Thank you for taking the time to answer those questions. Does anybody else have any last questions or comments that either of you would like to share as we close out today's session?
Well,
I was going to say, Smita, is that as we've talked with Katie and Michelle on the way into this conversation tonight, we also talked to several other people. And so if this audience should be aware that there's going to be at least one more UX and AI event at BayCHI in the coming months, maybe 2 or 3, because we've found so many interesting people doing slightly different and richer things as we explore. So this was fabulous tonight. Thank you.
And I want to just add that there's even research communities and conferences on this topic as well. And some of them have been going on a long time. And next month, I expect, speaking of AI, that Marvin Minsky's wife, Gloria Minsky, probably with a couple of her kids, are going to talk about their experience and Gloria's contributions to Marvin's ideas. And that'll be kind of an interesting fireside chat around that topic. So that's kind of where we're going for our next meeting. So with that, I think that we, unless Smithy, there's more things that you want to add, maybe that is the way to close out this wonderful evening with these 2 fantastic speakers, which we're very grateful for you guys to come. And the 50 people there was actually 60 people here at least. So.
Thank you, everybody.
Good night, then.
Good night, all.
Good night.
Waving goodbye.
Good night. Thank you for the fantastic talk.
Thank you for inviting us. It was so nice to meet y'all.
This was a real pleasure.